Really, really big honor to be on your podcast. So delighted to chat to you.
Well, I'm humbled when people say it's an honor. I hadn't realised that my podcast had travelled that far and that wide, and that people find it an honor to be on. But I accept that with good grace. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's great,
Um,
isn't it? That you know, you can have someone in the UK or US or Ireland, and we can all listen in. And there's such a community in like running and triathlon. That's great. Even with the borders, you don't know where people are listening to this or.
well, do you know, I've had quite a few callers or guests on from the United States because I've got a circle of contacts over there that sort of widens my potential guest list. But my wife is sick of, particularly last week when we were away in Hawaii at the Triathlon World Championships, and we're sitting down for a coffee, and somebody will say, "Are you Simon Ward?" And you'll see her eyes roll, and she'll glaze over and sort of zone out. Oh, I listened to your podcast, and it's quite flattering that they're not all Hawaiian, but they are from other parts of the world, and so it is quite flattering when I know you've written a book or you've been to a presentation when somebody from a far-flung place has heard of you and likes your stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I think sometimes you think that we're doing this stuff and we think we're in a silo. You don't actually think people are listening to it. So when you
Yeah, yeah,
when you hear back, it's always great, isn't it?
that's absolutely right. Yes. Well, look, you've got a lot of qualifications for being a guest on this podcast. I mean, the first and foremost is that you're an excellent runner, and I'm going to let you tell people about that in a moment. You also have a background in biomechanics, is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
My PhD is
for
biomechanics.
your
Yeah,
PhD, and you're a physiotherapist, so you do you learn and then you put it into practice. So you're covering all the bases.
yeah. I suppose it's always good. One kind of lends into the other. When I was running at an early age, and you'd probably go to physiotherapy, or you'd be interested in
Hmm.
fitness, obviously in general, because you're running, and then so that's kind of what you go into, and then I think they've really both helped each other because sometimes you can go to a physio and they're not they're not into sport. I remember going to one when I was in college and she was like, "Oh, just take 6 weeks off." And I was like, "I don't just
Yeah,
walk
that
the
doesn't work.
dog." Yeah. I don't
That
just walk the
work.
dog on a Sunday. It's like you're asking for a lot here. So I'll
Yeah,
do all the exercises if I'm injured. Um, but they've both helped each other. And then there's been so many fantastic physios I've got to go to um, personally, and then I kind of apply that when I'm learning it myself. So it's been
yes.
great.
And with my background, it's not physiotherapy, but it's strength and conditioning. So whether I was working with an athlete in a club that was injured or um, going through my own rehab, I'd always be asking questions. And sometimes I think that the physios felt a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of questions. I was like, so why has this happened? And how do we do that? And how can we stop it happening in the future? But one thing I've learned as a coach, and I wish more coaches would do that, is that collaborating with physios and um, learning from them and I've asked plenty of physios to come down to our training sessions and see what the athletes do so they can understand our sport and the way they train. Um, I wish more coaches would collaborate with their physios to build up a relationship because that might enhance their coaching, but it also helps their learning and it helps you as a physiotherapist to understand that sport, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, yeah. I think, as you said, there needs to be a little bit more joined up thinking at times rather
Hmm.
than just the athlete going to one. And then sometimes the messaging can be difficult. Like, so you have your background as a triathlon coach, as a certified strength and conditioning specialist. So we can talk the same language.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's like Chinese whispers. If I tell the athlete something, they
Oh
go down
yeah,
to you. You're not really sure, are they loud train, are they not? Like they come back to me, they're saying they're doing some exercises. I'm not really sure which ones. So if you chat, it's like, you know, um, compliance or rehabilitation might be an issue, but you could be doing a circuit class or some kind of strength and conditioning that essentially could be the rehab anyway. So it is
mm.
great when we can kind of link in and,
Well,
work
you've
together.
you've made a good point there because if I get an athlete that goes to see the physio and they'll say, right, well, I've got this problem with my hamstring, so she says that I need to do, or he says that I need to do these exercises where I sit on the bench and I straighten my leg, with my foot under this thing. So, oh, are you talking about leg extensions then?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. That's what I think they said. So I'm thinking, well, you've got a hamstring problem. Why are you talking about leg extensions? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I have to bring my heel up to my bum. Oh, hold on a minute. That's not a leg extension.
Yeah, yeah,
That's a
exactly.
knee flexion. No, she definitely said sit on it rather than lie on it. Right. So, but so now what I do is, certainly with the athletes that I've got, I recommend they all go to see my physio and make the journey to Leeds,
Yes.
because that means I can go and observe the assessments, and then whenever there's been any treatment, I ask if they can ask the physio to share the
Yeah.
report and the rehab exercises with me, so I can then make sure they're prescribed properly.
Makes such a big difference as well. Like, here in Kilkenny, a running coach, James Lettingham or Emmett Dunleavy, I know, and I'd have also other physios or osteopaths
Hmm.
because you might be very good. I'm very good at like with back pain, lower limbs, but like terrible then with shoulders is just something I'm
Mm,
not good at. So, but
mm,
there's an osteopath Noel who's very good at like ribs and shoulders. So you need like connections and you need to develop that network so that like say if you have someone who gets injured, as you said, you send them to your physio, you trust them. If
hmm.
they can't do it, they know who to go to, or
Yeah.
and vice versa. I have loads of times where clients come in and it could be more like good structured training is what's needed
Hmm.
as opposed to more of the rehabilitation, and that's where it can work both ways.
We used to have a physio clinic. We owned a property, and within that, my ex-wife ran a physio clinic, and she was a Great Britain physio
Oh yeah, brilliant.
for Great Britain swimming. So she was really good. You talked about shoulders there. She was really good on upper
Yes.
body stuff, on shoulder stuff, particularly around swimming. So she would get lots of referrals from other physios and coaches, but also from uh, surgeons who'd done shoulder reconstructions for people, because she knew all about the structure of the shoulder more
Yeah.
than anything else. But then, like you say, she perhaps wasn't so good on hamstrings, but she knew other physios who, like you, they worked with runners, so they were probably um, more familiar with lower limb issues.
Yeah, big time. Like I think that's the key. It's like you need to specialize and have a network around there.
Mm, mm. So just because you mentioned when you write a book, and I know you've written a little book about healthy spines,
Yeah.
but tell us about your running career first, because you've run well. Firstly, you've run a sub 4 minute mile.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would think that if we've got these little benchmarks of things we'd like to do, sub 3 hour marathon, sub 10 hour Ironman, running a sub 4 minute mile would probably be amongst those.
Yeah. So, and I was lucky enough. So I was a decent runner. I've been running for a long time. I think that persistence pays off. So,
Mhm.
I have a sub 4 minute mile. I have a kind of one of the other, I've represented Ireland from kind of 800 meters to 10,000 meters cross country
Hmm.
at a European senior level. Um, I have basically all the odds, I call them. So I'm sub 340, so I'm 339 for 1500, 358 for the mile, 757 for a 3K, 1358 for a 5K, and 29
Right.
for a 10K. So
Wow.
it's a nice little spectrum to have. The 5Ks and the 10Ks came when I was a bit older. I concentrated more on the mile and 1500 meters, but it's been great to do the longer stuff, and I've really enjoyed it the whole way. I've you go through a lot of stuff when you run for kind of 20 years plus at a good level.
Did you ever come across Chris Jones?
Yeah, yeah, I really like Chris Jones.
Yeah, Chris is a friend of mine. I've known Chris for a long time. He
He was
was
really, yeah, yeah. He did a lot of good work in Irish athletics, and he's just a gent as well. Yeah,
yeah, I know. I If I refer to coaches who've been an influence on my career, Chris Jones would be one of them, and Malcolm Brown, who's a running coach who worked with the Brownlees and
oh yeah,
yeah, over here in Leeds. Malcolm would be another one. And they've both been on this podcast. So, but certainly Chris Jones, he was at Triathlon Ireland, wasn't he, as performance director, and then he went to Irish Athletics.
yeah. Irish athletics, and like I know some people still do. He brought some things in about like maybe like hills in the evening time after you've done a long run, and
Mhm.
just different things. Like as I said, a gent, and he brought in a lot of different types of training. So really fond of Chris. He was a gent.
Yeah, I was just thinking about your sub 4 minute miles. I don't know if you ever read Alex Hutchinson's book Endure.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And Alex was a track runner, probably like you, and probably from the same era. And he had this struggle to get under 4 minutes for a mile, didn't he, for ages and ages. And I think he managed it on a day when he was given wrong information and he thought he
Yeah,
was
he
running
said
too
that he
slow,
was
so he
feeling good.
relaxed a
Yeah,
bit, and
yeah.
all of a sudden he was able to get through it. And then after that, the floodgates opened.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Sometimes how the mind can determine things. But then actually, it's funny on that. Sometimes I feel like the psychology doesn't matter. Like, I think sometimes we can, it just depends on your perspective. Sometimes I can feel we can overthink these things.
Hmm.
And a lot of times for runners or triathletes, if we were being 100% honest with ourselves, we're probably not that fit for what we're trying to achieve.
Hmm.
When you look back, but sometimes I feel like runners and triathletes are so harsh on themselves.
Yeah.
So if they're not running, they think when they're on giving up in races or not trying, it's like, it's probably you're just something, either a little illness, or you're just not actually that aerobically fit, or
Mm.
the training hasn't gone as good as you'd hoped. And you're thinking it's a psychological thing when it's actually a physical. Because I had it for a year where I was like, oh, I need to give it more in races. I was trying to G myself up, and then
Yeah.
and it never worked. And then the following year, with the same level of confidence, which was zero, and then but more fitness, I ran way better. And then
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
that, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to worry about how I feel. Um, and I kind of feel that I think people can overthink things, and it's just like, look, you'll do your best. Everyone tries their best, and it's like, it's either going to be good enough on the day or it's not. And I wouldn't beat yourself up about
Well,
thinking you have to
that's
think a certain way.
I've had that conversation with people when they say, I should have tried harder. I'm like, nobody that I know ever goes to a race and doesn't try.
100%.
Right. I referred to being in Hawaii last week, and I'm listening to people saying, oh, if I just put a bit more effort in. Well, could you have done it? Could you have gone any faster? No. So you did everything you could,
Yeah.
and on that day it wasn't good enough. Now, understanding why, um, might be another conversation, but sometimes you can beat yourself up about trying to find a why, and it's just one of those days. And equally, if we spent as much time analyzing, when we just have one of those dream days when we weren't expecting
Yes.
it,
Yeah.
we don't
Exactly.
beat ourselves up about the fact that I went way faster than I'd expected. So what's happened there then?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. There's that kind of like neurological fatigue, like the nervous system, like
Yeah.
how that responds can make a massive variation. I
Oh.
can't I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's big enough.
Well, Alex talks about that, doesn't he? He says if you they did some research where they did a time to exhaustion study with people on bikes. Then they split the group in two and gave one half of the group a really intensive 90-minute puzzle to and a series of tests to work out on the computer. The other guys were able to just sit and watch their favorite video or a book, and then they got them to redo the time to exhaustion. And the folks that had been in front of the computer for 90 minutes were about 15% off
Yeah.
shorter in their time to exhaustion. And nearly all of them said, well, from the first pedal stroke, my legs felt really tired. And yet they'd done
Yes.
no physical exercise. So that makes you think, well, what about those folks who peak for a running race or a triathlon, but then they're tapering. And so because they've got all this spare time, they think, oh, I'll get loads of work done on the computer.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
and then they wonder why their performance was off. And it's, well, that's it. You've spent time on the computer instead of just
Yeah.
relaxing.
Maybe keeping your naps up or whatever else.
Yeah.
And then the thing is not to worry about it either. There's a paradox. It's like, if I listen to things on sleep, I try to do the right things, but then going to sleep can be sometimes like trying to sleep can be like trying to lose your keys. It's very hard to. So we can overthink about these things as well. I think if, as you said, just try keep things relaxed like you were doing,
Yeah.
and if you're thinking about it, like I've had it, conversely, then I've had it plenty of times where I've slept terrible and ran brilliant.
Hmm.
I've been thinking, and I've literally gone in thinking I'm going to run terrible and ran brilliant. There's not much you can do about it on the day, so it's just like, just roll with the punches. There's a song in Les Miserables, is like that, one day more we'll discover what this God in heaven has in store. And it's that thing. It's like, look, you can't really, like, that's the one thing I've learned as I've gone on as a runner. It's like you can't really, all you can do is put things into a pot and hope to God it works out on the day.
Mm.
And that's all you can do. Like, you can't really control if you're going to sleep well or you're going to be stressed or not stressed. Don't judge yourself for that things. Just roll with it. Because as you
Yeah.
go on, you'll realize I've honestly raced in like every scenario. Slept well, slept terrible, felt
Hmm.
great, felt terrible, ate at certain times, at other times, rushed to here, had all day at the race. You try put in place what you feel works for you, and then
Hmm.
after that, just like, look, you're gonna find out what God in heaven had in store for you after today, and that's all he can do.
Yeah, and I think there's an analogy I use that's about getting to the start line. You know, as a coach and maybe as a physio, all we can do is help an athlete get to the start line in great shape, and after that, it's in the hands of the gods, isn't it? You
Yeah,
know,
well, that's the name
and
of my book, actually. I don't know if you know that. I have the one called Secrets of the Healthy Spine, and then it's a free book if people want it. It's just a collection of articles. It's how to get to the line in the best shape possible. You can get it, just like cheeky plug, at everardpilates.com
yeah,
slash book. But yeah, that's exactly what it's called, how to get to the line in the best shape possible. Because that's all
ah,
we can do. It's like get there and then
yeah.
hopefully it all works out.
Well, let's get onto this then, because I know you've got other commitments today. Let's talk about how we get those athletes onto the start line, and let's talk about triathlon injuries, and particularly those related to running. So, um, Alison Rose is my physio, and Alison and I did a podcast, one of the very first ones I did, and she had this idea that, um, based on the people that she's seen in her clinic, of all the triathlon injuries, around 70 to 80% of them are related to running,
Yeah.
and that there are three main reasons for that. Inappropriate training, so probably doing too much too soon, or just doing more than your body's capable of absorbing. Um, Lack of strength around key joints and muscles, and poor technique. So, what are your thoughts on that? Do you align with Alison, and if so, why? Or do you think that there are other reasons?
Yeah, no, I'd be nearly 100% with her on a few of those. Like a lack of strength is big, and then the structure is so important. Like, having planned down weeks. And there's a thing called the acute to chronic workload ratio, which shows it's not even the amount of volume you do, it's sudden spikes in the type of training that you do.
Mm,
So, for example, if you have someone who's getting ready for an Ironman and they're doing that kind of low, slow plodding type of running, they should also just be keeping in some kind of strides, some kind of like quicker work. So if they go back to say Olympic
mm,
triathlon,
hmm
it's not such a shock to the body if they're on the track or they're doing kind of shorter runs. And then similarly, if you have someone who is doing some of the shorter, like say Olympic distances, or even shorter, like say sprint tries, but they
hmm
want to do a half Ironman or Ironman,
Yeah.
well, do a kind of long brick session, like do a long cycle into a long run. Not obviously what they're doing, but just, maybe have a 90-minute run in every 2 or 3 weeks, having built up from say 60 or 70, so that when you then go into the block of training, it's not this massive shock to the body where you're playing catch up. So I definitely think the structure, and that's where coaches like yourself, Simon, are so important for people. I always emphasize this. It's like you're putting so much time and effort into this,
Mm,
and like a coach relative is so cheap. Like, like if I asked you, say, if I asked someone to work for me, for the amount of time relative to the payment, they would be like, they'd actually like laugh or maybe be insulted. But like, they'd rather just go out and do it off a generic training program, or I'll be okay. It's like, give yourself the permission to do your best at the sport. It doesn't matter your level. Because as I said, I've ran at European level, I've ran against the Inga Britsons. So someone might look at me and go, oh God, he's a really good runner. I can tell you at every level, you feel like a bit of a fraud. There's
mm,
someone always ahead of you.
hmm mm,
So it doesn't matter if you're trying to, you know, complete an Ironman in like, say, 16 hours, or you're trying to, do one in sub 10 hours. It's like if you're trying something or you're doing a sprint triathlon for the first time, if you're trying it, I would recommend get a coach that'll structure things correctly for you. Second thing I would say is, especially as we get older, I would totally agree with your physio that strength training of some sort is massive. So we do our sports Pilates,
hmm
um, which just is targeted at like the areas that get injured in runners, that we do a kind of 45-minute class a week. But it doesn't have to be sports Pilates. If you wanted to do strength training, if you wanted to do, um, anything else that's activating the muscles, because the injuries that people get are all what we call passive injuries. The plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis, knee pain, hip
mm,
pain, even like if it's a hamstring, it's not a hamstring tear, it's like a tendinopathy of the hamstring. These are injuries that soccer players do not get. They get like hamstring tears or sprinters because they're using their muscles more. So what we're doing is overloading the passive structures, the joints, the ligaments, or the tendons of the body. So
Uh,
running and then cycling and swimming, because it's non-weight bearing, you get away with it a little bit more. Doesn't lend itself to activating the muscles. So you need to have at least once a week some kind of structured work that allows you to essentially wake up the muscles.
mm.
And then once the muscles woken up, they'll start naturally taking the pressure off they'll start taking the load.
Just going back to what you were saying about um, always keeping a little bit of something in your program. Keep a little bit, if you're training for
Yes.
an Ironman, keep a little bit of faster work in there, faster pace work, shorter work. I do think sometimes that periodization is to blame for this sort of like, right, well, it's also long, slow distance now. And then when we get to here, we're going to change that to do more intense stuff. And that I know that, in the physio clinic, they always used to say that you could tell when people have started their different training phases, because there'd always be in runners more injuries in September when they start the winter training, more injuries in
Yeah.
April when they all go back to the track. And I think what I've learned over the years as a coach is to, you know, the time of the year means that you change the emphasis of certain things, but you always keep something in. So, like you
Brilliant.
say, I always have some strides in there. I always quite often get people to do a long run, but then maybe stop for 4 or 5 minutes and just do some 30-second strides backwards and forwards, and
That'd be
then
brilliant.
continue with the long run. I always get them to have a long run or a longish run at least once a week at a really easy pace. Because just the body gets adapted to that. But I did want to ask you about your opinion on multi-directional work, because triathlon particularly is just sagittal plane, isn't it? It's all going forward. So swimming, and I know there's a little bit of rotation in swimming, so and we need to include that, but there's very little
Yeah.
lateral running when we there's very little lateral movement when we run. And so certain, I think I counted up, if you were training 10 or 12 hours a week as a triathlete over the course of a year, there's several 100,000 swim strokes, several 100,000 footsteps, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
many more 100,000s of pedal strokes. So if even if your technique is only 0.1% away from being perfect, it's still imperfect for 500,000
Yes. Yeah.
steps,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that can build up. And so those muscles that we're using get really overused, and the muscles that help to move you laterally or to change direction are underused. Um,
Yeah.
so what are your thoughts on runners and triathletes, including at least once a week, maybe in a warm up of some multi-directional, maybe ladder and hurdle work like the soccer players would do?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. If you get people to do it, it'd be brilliant. Like what you could do is like a little karaoke, which is like essentially
Mm-hmm.
karaoke or
Yeah.
grapevine. So one foot in forward, one foot behind, and just
Yes.
add that in. As you said, a good time to do that is in the warm up.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas what we would do is like maybe high knees, bum kicks, but keeping the knees out in front to kind
Yes.
of emphasize that good mechanics. Side
Yes.
to side actions, as you said, for the groins. And then you could add in a couple of like karaoke where you're trying to lift the front leg, bring it behind, or if they would do hurdles, that would be brilliant. As you said,
Mm.
just to add, the key thing that can cause an injury is a lack of variation. So, as you said, you're doing the same, especially when people go into a sim or a block. Like the strides work well because they're even just opening up the legs, they're
Mm.
activating the muscles more. Whereas, like if you're constantly just going out doing the same kind of training in the same range of motion, it's not going to help. Like it's going to, as you said, overload
Mm.
those certain areas. So you just want to add that little bit of variation in.
Yeah, I was reading a little bit on uh, stress and recovery recently, and it was talking about how, when you're doing unloading patterns for certain sports, like in a recovery week, but you can still keep some stress, some bone and tendon stress, but by adding different directional stuff in there, it really helps to preserve the integrity of those connective tissues, doesn't it? And I think you're probably going to tell me that the majority of triathlon injuries and running injuries are lower limb, even if they're not emanating from the lower limb. If they're caused by
Oh yeah, yeah.
hip tightness
Uh,
or upper back tightness, you're still going to feel most of them from the knee downwards. And once you get an injury as a runner, you can probably carry on swimming with a little bit of an injury or niggle, and the same with cycling. Once you're injured as a runner, it pretty much brings to a stop all running.
uh, depends. If it is a
Huh.
tendon issue, you can stay running on it as long as it's
Really?
not over
Okay.
3 out of 10. Yeah,
Okay.
because you made a really good point there, Simon, that especially if people do have like tendon issues, even on their break, they should be loading that tendon slightly. So my left
Okay.
knee gets sore, and I'll actually find it's worse after a break
Hmm.
because it needs a certain amount of tension through it. And then
Okay.
I kind of understand it's like, okay, well, I need to get it back up to speed and then it'll be okay. So like the first couple of weeks it'll be a little bit achy. Now, what we would say is it shouldn't be over 3 out of 10, and it
Now, hold
shouldn't.
on a minute. Let me just jump in there then. So that I'm always interested because my physios use that 3 or 4 or 6 out of
Yeah,
10.
yeah, it's tough,
But
isn't it?
I mean, most people aren't very good at RPE when they're exercising,
Yes.
because they're always using their watches and gadgets. Um, what would a 3 out of 10, if you've got an Achilles problem, what would a 3 out of 10 be? A bit of stiffness in the morning and then wearing off, a little bit of
Exactly. Yeah.
discomfort.
Yes. Very slight, like
Yeah,
stiffness, ache. Not more than like an awareness of it. Not more
right.
than
So if,
that. So if
so
it
if
was an
you're
acute
limping,
pain, two things I would say is one, it should not feel like acute. It shouldn't feel like very like a stabby pain into the Achilles. Second,
hmm,
if it's after like 2 or 3 minutes, if it's making you change the way you run, then you have to stop. Like so, if you're
right,
limping with it, so they're
yeah.
the two kind of criteria.
So if you're limping when you're walking, that's definitely no then.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And exactly, runners can be quite um, tough. So what they'll class a 3 out of 10, someone else would probably be classing a 10 out of 10. The other criteria I would say as well is that the next day it shouldn't be any worse.
Right.
So if you find like the next day it's like, okay, it was okay that morning, you went for a run, um, it was a little bit stiff maybe at the start. It was okay, and then it was slightly stiff, but just aware. But you're able to run normally. The next day when you wake up, you've done some of your exercises or your foam rolling. The next day you
Yeah.
wake up, it's feeling the same as the day before. That's fine. If the next day you wake up and it's like, as you said, sore walking, or you're way more aware of it,
Mm.
you've probably overloaded it a bit too much.
You talked about beating yourselves up and maybe having some self-compassion. I was thinking if you had a dog that was limping, you wouldn't take it out for a walk and make it run around
I know
chasing a
it's
ball
so
all day,
funny,
would you?
isn't it?
But we always feel, but as athletes, we always feel it's okay for us to do that to ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so I've always believed, and maybe I'm a bit more open-minded or sort of lateral thinking than a lot of athletes, but I've always thought that every time I get injured, firstly, there's a bit of pain when I get injured. Then
Yeah,
there's frustration when I realize it's going to impact on my training. And then when I do go to see the physio, um, there's more pain to come when she presents me or he presents me with the bill, right?
yeah,
And normally it involves 4 or 5 visits to sort of, get back to activity and
yeah.
and performance. So, you know, um, I took the decision a long time ago that if I went to see the physio once a month and she could say, because I keep referring to she, but my physio's a she,
Yeah,
if she could say to me, right, Simon, you're getting a little stiff in this. You're getting a little stiff in this right hand side because of your shoulder. But what that's doing is translating down to your hip now and to your ankle there. So we need to keep working on the mobility around here and getting the foam roller into the glutes and TFL and a few more of these mobility exercises on this side. That keeps me on the straight and narrow. Whereas if I ignore all of that, it's leading me down the path of some sort of little niggle which is going to develop. Um, What's your preference? Do you like to see people reactively or proactively?
oh, like obviously, like proactively is so much better, isn't it?
Is
That
how
like
many of how many of your patients are actually proactive, would you say, as a percentage?
of the runners. Do you know what? Like sometimes when you get people in, you kind of have a conversation with them.
Hmm.
So you're just like I would say maybe 50-50. Maybe
Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
like maybe less, maybe like 40%. But I think what you do is you gauge it with the person. So I have some elite runners who come to me every week.
Hmm.
Like they want to get the pelvis checked. They just want to get things checked, and I do kind of like sports massage with them. Then I'll have like a level down that maybe will come every like 3 or 4 weeks, and then we'd have a level down off that maybe will come every, like as you said, like 6 weeks would be
Hmm.
kind of ideal. 8 weeks.
Mm.
Sometimes they drop off, but because it's like you say, it's like there's a great analogy of like if your parents at 17 give you a class brand new car, but there was one condition: you could never change that car again for the rest of your life.
Mm.
And if you needed to change a part in it, the part wouldn't work as well. Like you'd service that car regularly, you'd make sure you look after it. Well, like our body is kind of like that car. If you
Mm-hmm.
need to replace a knee, it isn't going to work the same.
No,
Like
and
you,
it's going
so
to be a lot
it's
more painful than paying for your car
exactly, and
starter motor replacing as well, isn't it?
it's like you say as well. It's like if you get an injury, one, you're out, and then two, um, when you're out, and then two, you're going to be like about 4 sessions probably getting back. Whereas
Yeah.
if you're going once, you're kind of like addressing these things, like, and that's what
Hmm.
we do with the Pilates. It's like
Yeah.
it's harder. Like that's why I came up with that, because I found that when people were rehabbing, they were fine when they were injured, and then once the pain went away, they stopped
Yes.
completely. And then I'd see them in like that's just a normal person, say,
Hmm.
come for an injury, not people who are regularly running, but um they come back and I was like, "What are you doing your exercises?" No. So then I came up with that sports Pilates. So at least that they're doing something once a week to try, and we have a couple of like foam rolling and myofascial release techniques that they can
Hmm.
do for their particular area that gets tight or
Mm.
sore, just to stay on top of it. It's, again, another analogy. It's like if it's snowing outside, I can go out with a brush, every so often and brush it away, or I can wait 3-4 days and have to get a shovel.
Mm. Yeah, definitely keeping on top of things seems to be a way more sensible and approach. And like you said, if you need 4 visits, if
That's
you were
4 months, say,
once,
for you.
that's exactly, if you were going every month, that's 4 months. Whereas the likelihood is if you are going every month, you're probably not going to get injured at all. And if you do, it's going to be quite minor because the physio and yourself between you, you've probably spotted that there's
Yes,
something
exactly.
something occurring that needs attention then. Um, so how do you find the right physio then? Because I guess that unless people hear of you from word of mouth or they've picked up your book, you might be outside of the sort of bandwidth of a lot of people. So how
Oh yeah, no, and I
for
don't really take on people, so
no, so for somebody somebody who's listening to this who's thinking, actually that makes a great deal of sense. So I'm going to try and find a physiotherapist. How you mentioned earlier about the physios that don't really know about running, and so they just say, "Well, take 6 weeks off if you've got a sore knee,"
yeah,
which
yeah,
which
yeah.
isn't going to work. So how do I find somebody that's got the right level of skill and empathy, um, uh, or for
I,
me?
I I think I think there's two things I'd say. One, you kind of hit it at the start, where it's like if you've chatted to other people in the club, like runners and triathletes, we are picky. Like we want, if we're not
Hmm.
getting back,
Yeah.
you'll find soon enough. So if someone's been in the sport long enough in your area, they'll have someone. The second thing is if you have an injury, I always say like there should be a 3 session rule. So if you're not seeing any improvement after 3 sessions, I would be moving on to someone else.
Okay.
Those two things, and don't be afraid, you know, to move on. Like sometimes we can feel, and that's the problem. We can feel like, oh, we have to keep going back,
Mm.
uh, or feel committed. The person, if they're doing a good job, now that's not like that you're completely injury free, but you should be like, okay, I'm on the right lines. It's feeling a lot better. It's been explained to me what's going on. If you have a bad Achilles tendonitis, for example, like a bad one to stop it, you're going to be out for 12 weeks. There's no getting away from that fact.
Mm.
Um, if you're coming back from, like, say, a knee surgery or something like that, you're going to be out for a while, but you should be seeing, say, with the Achilles tendonitis, you should be feeling better. You should be feeling it's getting stronger and getting better, and have a plan towards where, okay, we're back kind of easy jogging in 8 weeks, and building back into that place.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So definitely word of mouth. Um,
Word them out,
I
and
mean,
then 3 sessions to kind
and
of
again, there's
assess.
something I always think is if you don't have a physiotherapist that you know you can go to, when you get injured and you're suddenly looking around pages on the internet trying to find
Yes.
somebody, A, you're more likely to make a decision that means you end up with the wrong person. And B, if you're not already on their list, like you said, somebody you don't take on any new patients. So I guess that anybody ringing you is going to have to keep searching.
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
always
Yeah.
it's always worth doing this search for a physiotherapist before you need them, so that when you do need them, it's much easier for you to pick the phone up and make an appointment.
100%. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And as you said, we kind of mentioned at the start, it's important just that you get your network kind of in.
Hmm.
Do you know, like, so if you know that, okay, I kind of specialize with back pain and the kind of leg injuries, it's like, okay, no, there. You
Mm.
might have, as you said, your ex-wife? Is that because she was good at shoulders? Like, you know, I've gone to so many, I know I'm a physio as well, so I'll just be interested in what people are doing, but I've gone to, even as a runner, I've just gone to so many physios, like so many. If I hear of anyone, I go, because it just puts my head of like, okay, what are they good at?
Mm.
Some people are really good at diagnosis. Like, if is this something that I need to stop? I need to know what it is. Some people are really good at treatment. Like, I'm just in acute pain, or they'll just do something to really get it better. And then other people are really good at like rehabilitation and making sure like an overall plan. And there's a bit of trial and error, but you know, you're going to be feeling better anyway after it. So. Oh, you're on mute there, Simon.
Apologies.
No problem.
Let's talk about the mechanics of running then.
Yeah.
Because triathletes, I don't know what runners are like, but triathletes are always like wanting to tinker with the technique. And if somebody was to write an article in a running magazine or triathlon magazine about technique, everybody's all over it, and then they start trying to analyze their own thing. So let's talk about running mechanics first. And one of the big things that I hear people talking about is, well, I mean, look at Alistair Brown. He's a 4-foot striker and he's been a double Olympic champion. So there's obviously something in that. And a few years ago, the pose technique was very, very popular. And then I hear people saying, yeah, but look at so-and-so. He's a heel striker and he's, he breaks records here.
Yeah.
So they're constantly trying to change. Should we worry too much about what our stride mechanics are like, or should we be thinking about other things like our overall body biomechanics?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, you shouldn't really. Well, look, I'll put it this way. There's only 3 things that make you better at running. As a preface, okay, so lactic threshold, VO2 max, and then running economy. Like how smooth you were saying, if you're off by a bit, that is a discerning factor.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not dismissing like running mechanics, and I'm a biomechanist anyway. So it is important. Now, where I do have an issue is everybody's looking for this silver bullet.
Mm-hmm.
And the more, like I said, I have a PhD in biomechanics, but the more I've learned about the body, the more I'm convinced, Daniel, personally, that you can't consciously change something without it causing issues. So what I mean is that, like, the best thing you should do is give your body the building blocks it needs to do well. So you should have good mobility. You should have good movement, mainly in your ankle, your hip, and your upper back, and your shoulder joint. You should have good stability, like balance in your arch of your foot. Your knee, it shouldn't buckle in or out. Hip should have good stability anyway, and then shoulder blade. Okay, so even if you were just doing mobility work there, stability work on your core, obviously your lower back. Then lastly, so you have mobility, you have stability, like activate and switch on the right muscles, kind of like what we were talking about. And then the last thing is called motor control. It's like you made a good example, like, you know, the side drills, different running drills. So I would definitely put those into my program. As we said, we do the Pilates once a week to try give you the mobility and the stability that you need. And it's a great injury prevention one anyway. And then after that, just do your strides and never, ever, ever think about trying to be on your toes or keeping your head like in a drill. Make the drill so let's say you're focusing externally. But I've seen people get into serious trouble. I'll give you a good example. We had a guy, he was a silver medalist in under 20s Europeans. The only problem was the guy who bet him was also Irish. So this guy, even though he was silver medalist in Europeans, he never won a national title. He didn't even win a provincial title because they were in the same province. The guy who won the Europeans was always on his toes. He had just a beautiful style. Really light on his toes. The other guy was more like kind of 4-footing, like stronger runner. So what he did was he changed his style to match the other guy. So he went on his toes, and he was so like determined. He'd like any jog, he'd be on his toes. It nearly looked unnatural. And after a while, it did start looking more natural. And then he was running well. You know, I don't know if he was running better or worse. But by 21, that guy was finished with running, and at 23 he had like a double Achilles surgery
Mm-hmm.
because he thought consciously he was able to do something that subconsciously his body didn't want to do. Now, we have evolved from cavemen and cave women. We weren't waiting for some YouTube video to tell us how to run. It's ingrained in us. And if you're heel striking, there's a reason you're heel striking. Or if your stride is a little bit shorter, there's a reason. And you should trust that process.
I always think if you watch children running on the beach in bare feet, they just run naturally. They don't worry about it. They just
Yes,
run, and they
brilliant.
run fast, and they run so smoothly. And then as we get older, we add all these layers of tightness and stiffness in. Most of them are caused by lack of movement, poor posture, sitting down all day, and
Yes.
tightness that occurs around some of those joints and muscles, and maybe also lack of stability because we're not supporting ourselves, and we're not maintaining that sort of mobility and stability. And so it's poor movement practices and poor habits that we pick up as we get older in our life that lead to us running in the way that we do.
Yeah,
Um, and,
100%.
and I just think if we could go, you hear a lot of coaches talking about that. If we could go back to playing like children, we'd all be far better off. But actually, I don't think that's a throwaway comment. I think there's some truth in it.
No, definitely. And if you think about the way a child develops, they're born with mobility.
Hmm.
So they can put their toe in their mouth in their mouth. They have a lot of mobility. They learn stability. Like they learn how to crawl, roll, and like I've seen a lot of children where they can't run smoothly. And I always ask, did your child crawl? And they're like, no. So they didn't learn that stability, and then
Mm.
it manifests in issues later. And then the motor control is they're just practicing. They stand up, they fall, they stand up, they fall. There's always a coffee table there to bang the head off.
Yeah.
But they're programming this. Yeah, exactly. And then
Head scars.
scars, yeah, will compare. And then, as you said, what they get is variability in their movements. Like we do it less, but me and you, you're going up a tree, you're playing different sports, you're basically programming different things so that when
Mm.
you do see a child who's graceful, they have all these components.
Mm.
And as you said, we're designed to move, we're designed to be healthy. So it's given the building blocks. But sometimes you see, people don't want to do the work. When I say it's 45 minutes a week of doing this intense work, or strength training, like your physio said, or doing it, they're like, oh, but if you read an article, oh, I just need to pop on my toes. That's fine,
Mm.
So it's that kind of thing sometimes that can cause the issues.
When we're introducing, you've mentioned mobility and strength. Now you've talked about your Pilates. I go to yoga, and I
Brilliant.
was one of those late starters, but Louisa and the other physios have encouraged me now to the point where I do 45 minutes every morning of different movement practices
Oh my
and,
God,
and
that's
what have
great.
you. Yeah, and I almost now it's like brushing my teeth, and if I don't do it, I feel like a little unclean when I go
Yeah, yeah,
out.
yeah, great.
So I've been late to this, but I coming from a strength background, I've always thought that people should get involved with strength first, particularly as we get older. It's one of the things that we lose with age. But another coach encouraged me to think about mobility first, because if you've got limited range of motion in, say, the upper back, and you keep doing pull-ups to develop your lats, you're still only moving and gaining strength through a limited range of motion. So what we should all try to do first is to get a better range, the best range of motion that we can have, so we can use the muscle through its full range and then add strength on top of that.
Yeah, that is, like, as you said, there's two things I'd say to that. The first is that that's the order it goes in. Mobility first, because you need to get the range of
Right.
motion. You'll always be able to move. That's why we can limp. So say if you can't move through your hips and I
Yeah.
do loads of core stability, you'll always be
Hmm.
able to switch off those core muscles and move through
Hmm.
your back.
Hmm.
Like, if there was a 50 pounds on the ground, even if I've tried to stop you moving through your spine, if you physically can't move any other way, you'll get down to
Yeah.
pick that up. So, but the other thing I would say is that, like say in our sports Pilates, that's what we try to do. It's like trying to combine the both of them. Like that's absolutely
Okay.
brilliant that you 45 minutes, like you do it every day. And if I was that, I would definitely have, say, mobility practices. And we give like mobility routines in our program.
Mm.
But for most people, it's like just kind of combining the two.
Yeah.
Because if you do all mobility and then you're not doing any stability or strength, that's not going to be good either.
No.
So I think having a combo of the two is the best.
Mm. Yeah. So, and for runners, then, what are your preferred methods of developing strength? I mean, when we talk about strength, most people think, well, if I'm a runner, I need to get strong legs, so I should be going in the gym and doing squats and deadlifts and maybe some lunges. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, like we kind of go from a ground up approach. So we like, as you said, the first thing once we're getting good mobility back in the hips, I'll send on a link with just some of the key exercises I think are good for uh, triathletes. So you can see kind of some of the movements. We have a free trial of that Sports Pilates. I can put that in the link. It's Everard Pilates / sport free trial if they want
Mm-hmm.
to check it out. But um, yeah, like I would say doing like say your bridging, your glute clam work, your kind of bird dog or Superman work, some of your hip openers and ankle mobility drills, and
Mm.
then getting into, as you said, once those muscles are activated, they can kind of activate the core and you have good body awareness, moving into like that single leg deadlift is probably my favorite exercise for
Mm-hmm.
runners.
Yeah, me,
Um
me too.
yeah,
I particularly like I've started doing like an arabesque movement now, which is great for balance.
yes,
It's
brilliant.
great for poise. So it's but I go from a staff position, so what standing on one leg, knee raised, um, straighten my leg out into an arabesque with my arms wide open, try to get as far forward but balanced on my feet, and then go back into a reverse lunge and then come back up and create that as a movement pattern.
That
So
sounds brilliant.
I'm getting everything in there. I'm getting that balance. I'm getting some sort of posterior chain control as well, and then I'm getting some of that single leg strength. But it's a very simple movement. It requires no weights. Um, you measure your performance by just seeing how much better you're getting on the balance, don't you? Really on that one, rather than being able to lift more weight.
Well, what's great about that is it's a self-limiting exercise.
Yeah,
Skipping is the same. I love those because if you can't do it correctly, you can't do it.
yeah,
Whereas like I like actually squats as well, to be fair. Um, Lunges, if you have any SI joint problems, I wouldn't go with that. But otherwise, grand. Um, but you can do them with poor technique. If you try
mm,
that single leg deadlift or you try that arabesque movement, you'll just fall over if you can't do it.
yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
until you can do it correctly, you can't do it. It's the
Mm,
same with skipping. I love skipping because you're going to keep hitting the rope. Where if you're
yeah,
trying to do jumps and landing, you can do that and get yourself into trouble because you mightn't have good technique or you mightn't have the strength built up. But if you're constantly hitting the rope and you have a set time of like a minute that you're doing it for or 2 minutes, well, you
mm,
might only get 10 jumps the first day and you might get 12 the next day. And then a good couple of
mm.
weeks or months later, your legs have developed and you have coordination and now you're doing 50, 60, 70.
I love skipping. I know we're going to talk about running economy and plyometrics, and for me, plyometrics is the most basic type of. Sorry, skipping is the most basic type of plyometrics you can
That's all I
get.
was going to mention
Um,
there.
and but it's just fantastic for timing. It's fantastic for concentration. It's almost you have to concentrate because if you don't, particularly if you're using one of them heavier weight wire skipping ropes, every time it whacks you on the
Yeah, it
back of
does
the leg,
hurt.
it hurts, doesn't it? So you want to avoid that.
That's
So
so
you have to
funny.
focus. So it's skipping can actually be a meditative practice as well.
Yeah, have you ever done it without your shoes on? I had to put them back on because honestly, if it grazed it, it was like
Yeah.
nearly cut your foot. Yeah, and that's all I wanted to mention on plyometrics. Sometimes we think it can be a big deal, but there was a great study that looked at the influence of skipping. So some people did
Yeah.
3 or 4 minutes of skipping
Yeah.
or jumping rope for our US listeners, and then others just did 3 or 4 minutes of extra running, either
Mm,
at the end of a run or in the warm up before workouts or sessions. And they found that the group that did the skipping improved their like squat jump, their counter movement jump by about
wow.
13%, about
Really?
10%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was like a 3% improvement and like ankle stiffness, all the things associated with plyometrics. And they actually had a 3% improvement in 3K times versus a
Wow.
1.5% improvement in the running group who had no improvement in their plyometrics. So I just have
Wow.
my skipping rope in my car, take it out once a week or twice a week, just do a little
Mm,
bit of skipping, and it's no extra time. I just come back to my car If I'm going for a 60-minute run, I'll come back at
Yeah.
57
Yeah.
minutes, do 3 minutes of skipping, like do maybe a minute,
Hmm.
take 10 seconds off, do it again, and I go double leg for 20, single for 10, single for 10, and then alternate between the two
Hmm.
for 20 and try to do that 3 times. But as I
It's
said, if you if you keep hitting the rope, once the time is up, the time is up. Don't keep going to hit that distance. You're not
mm,
ready for it yet.
mm. I think that runners and triathletes could probably do a lot better with their warm-ups than just going out and running for 10 minutes while they're ready. I think this is a great opportunity for us as coaches and physios to encourage people to do the strength and mobility. So if you've got a 50-minute run planned, run for 40 minutes, but spend the first 10 minutes doing a little circuit where you're slowly building your heart rate up, but you're doing some different
Yeah,
movement
it'd be
patterns. You're
brilliant.
doing some lateral stuff, you're doing some ladders, you're raising your heart rate with some skipping, you're doing some maybe those squats and some sort of more aggressive mobility type body weight strength stuff. And it'll just be a way more effective it'd be a way more effective warm up than just
Yeah,
going
and
for a run.
even for performance, as you said, you'll probably see better improvements.
Mm, yeah. Um, so one of the things I know you wanted to talk about was some of the strategies that runners can take, try and endurance athletes, let's say, to avoid or minimize injury. I guess some of the if we introduce some of the things we've talked about in this conversation,
Yeah.
that would help. Is there anything additional to what we've covered today that you might add in?
No, I think this has been great. I think like the key things that we've said are like that variation in your training. Have structure. Do you have like a down week planned? Um, are you adding variation, like having strides in there? Do you have maybe one day of kind of strength work or Pilates or something that's changing what you're doing? Now you
Mm,
said, Simon, as I said, in our course we do it say once a week because I just like getting it done and then it's done. But if you wanted to do that, say 10 minutes in your warm up, that's brilliant as well. It doesn't have to be a certain way. It's
mm,
just adding that in. I think, as you said, having the strides for variation and then keeping in some of the looking at the whole year, as you were saying, there you actually said it great, Simon, where it's like there should be an emphasis, but not that be the sole thing. So if you're getting ready
mm,
for a longer event, yes, that's the emphasis. Of course you have to do the longer stuff, but include strides, include maybe one session every 2 to 3 weeks that has a kind of quicker component. So it's not a big transition back to, say, a
mm,
track. And identically the same thing. It's like if you know you're going to be doing a marathon, say in the, marathons are roughly around now or in the spring, add in a longer run every 2 or 3 weeks just to keep that in there. Yeah. So I think if people had started doing those things, they'd see a big improvement.
mm. So as we wrap up, then, apart from those injury tips, any other summary factors that our listeners can take away? I mean, I really like the diversity and the variety. I think whether I'm writing about nutrition, whether I'm writing about strength training or mobility, or just keeping fit in general, diversity and variety comes up every time. Getting the basics right seems to come up in every. If I was to give people lists of
Yeah,
guidelines for all these
100%.
things, getting the basics right will probably be occupy the top spot in nearly every list of recommendations.
Oh yeah, it's exactly. There's no like magic bullet, and that's what we're really saying about the running technique. Like everyone wants, there's no magic bullet. There's just getting solid training in at an appropriate volume, doing a little bit of the extra work, and that gets results. And you could be by the time you've actually tried chase these different magic bullets, you would have found you would have nearly been there if you had done just the consistent training.
Yeah. Well, Owen, it's been fantastic to catch up with you.
Simon, thank you so much for having me on.
You've mentioned a couple of things that we can post links to in the show notes, your
Yeah, brilliant.
Pilates
I
and
I
some other
have, yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
exactly. I have a free book. It's just a collection of articles on training or injury prevention advice, and you can get that at Everard EVERARD Pilates PILATES.com/book. And then we do have free trials of our sports Pilates. You try it for a week, see if it's
Hmm.
for you, and we'll start that in November
Hmm.
again, and that'll be everardpilates.com/sport free trial. So yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Simon. Really appreciate that.
You're most welcome, Owen. And if you're ever over in Yorkshire, please come and say hello. It'd be great to do an in-person workshop for some of our listeners, maybe.
Yeah, there's a couple of good races over there. So the Abbey
Yeah,
Dash and
yeah, coming up soon, actually,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think.
yeah. Next week.
Cool.
Is it this week?
Okay, Owen, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Simon.
Appreciate that, and we'll speak to you soon.
Take care.